Hello there! So those of you who have been here for a while will know that this year I set myself the challenge of reading one book that I hadn't heard spoken about on BookTube each month. Mainly because I wanted to get to the books on my shelf that perhaps have been pushed to the side since I joined BookTube, and also because I think it's nice to talk about books that everyone else isn't talking about. I think especially with certain books that get a lot of hype, there is a kind of generalised discussion about them. Interesting as it is to see everyone's different take on the same book, I think it's also nice to get different recommendations on BookTube. I certainly joined BookTube because I wanted to hear about books that I hadn't been hearing about otherwise, but I think after a certain extent it does get to the point where you're just hearing about the same things over and over. Anyway, so I've been doing that so far this year and it's been going really well. I've read some interesting books. There hasn't been any standouts yet, but it's definitely a good experience and I'm really enjoying the chance to get to some of the older books on my shelf. But I thought this month I'm going to start doing an individual review for these books, which I haven't been doing up until now, because as I say, I want to start a discussion about books that people haven't necessarily heard about, and I think it would be nice to do standalone reviews to give them the coverage and also let you know that this is where you can find out about books that you might not have heard of before. So I will be doing this every month from now on. This month, the book that I read that I hadn't heard of on BookTube was Mrs. Hemingway by Naomi Wood. I picked this up in a buy one get one half price deal probably about 4 years ago now, and it was one that I hadn't heard anything about, but I quite like books about writers. I think they're one of my sort of niches, so I went for this because I wanted to just pick something up, and it was called Mrs. Hemingway, and this is basically a fictionalised account of Ernest Hemingway's wives. So all in all, he had 4 wives. I always thought of him as a bit of a misogynist. In this, admittedly, he doesn't come across that way, but he does have a habit of, after sort of 6 or 7 years of marriage, he starts to have dalliances, and he's quite open about his affairs. He doesn't necessarily hide them from his wives, and this looks at how each of his wives has dealt with the affair, how his marriages have ultimately ended because of these affairs, and how he jumps within a matter of 2 weeks to getting married to the other women after he's been granted divorce. I was worried going into this because I thought it was going to be a bit of hero worship for Ernest Hemingway, that the wives were probably going to be quite simpering and weak, and that was a bit of a worry for me, that he was going to be painted as this man god and these women were just his underlings. That's not the case at all. The characterisation in this is fantastic. And Naomi Wood is actually asked about the fact that, you know, how did she deal with writing about these women dealing with Ernest's affairs without making them seem submissive and weak. And she said that it was something that she really wanted to focus on, and I think she definitely did a fantastic job. The interesting thing is that each of the wives deals with the infidelity in such different ways. So his first wife, Hadley, actually is best friends with the woman who becomes his mistress. And in real life, we know that Hadley actually sent a letter to Fife, his mistress, inviting her on a holiday to France with them. All 3 of them together. Naomi Wood has gone on to imagine what happened on that holiday and how they dealt with each other. And Hadley's quite an interesting one because she's quite a easygoing wife. She's his first wife, she's got his first son, but she kind of in the end she doesn't want to fight for him. She doesn't want to beg for him. She basically just says, look, take your time, have 100 days of solitude and then decide who you want. You can't have both of us. Whereas his second wife, Fife, was very much the other way, and she was kind of accepting of the fact that she was going to have to let him go, but she made it quite obvious that she wanted to make it as difficult for him as possible. Whereas his third wife, Margaret, kind of was, I think, his main love, and she ended up leaving him. And then his fourth wife is kind of she's not besotted with him like his other wives have perhaps been. She's kind of just accepting of him. It's so interesting, and I think the women are so crafted well. They're never portrayed as weak people. It very much comes across this desire, especially with Hadley, I would say, this desire to kind of accept his infidelity because they didn't want the marriage to end, to let him do what they felt he needed to do. And there were other women as well, and the wives knew about those, but most of them said sort of you could tell when an affair was like just a dalliance and when it was a serious thing. But what I really also liked about this is that Ernest Hemingway is not painted as a villain, and I thought that might annoy me. I wanted him to be held responsible for his actions, but I think in the strength of the women, he is held responsible. Certainly Fife does not just roll over. She does hold him very much responsible, and she gets quite angry about what's happened. But he's not a typical villain, because I think that would have been the easy path to go down. But what Naomi Wood manages to do is portray a quite confused man who just has this lust for passion, that he falls in love too easily. He loves the idea of being in love, he loves the passion of it, but he doesn't actually like the long haul. He doesn't like it when it gets serious, when he has to settle down. He gets bored and he gets restless, and he goes and he falls in love with somebody far too easily. But it's really lovely because you feel the love that he has for his wives, and none of them end up absolutely hating him, and all the wives actually end up getting along and talking together about their experiences. And it just creates this really lovely atmosphere where you can completely understand what's happening in the characters' heads. And as I say, none of them come across as being weak or submissive. Even Ernest Hemingway is an understandable kind of bad guy. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It ended up being the best book that I've read so far this month. I didn't think I would like it, purely because it's kind of marketed as just a sort of easy read. As you can see from the cover, it's kind of designed as this kind of beach read, and admittedly it's a really fast read. I read it in 2 days in the end, and it's not the thinnest, but I wouldn't say that it is just your typical bestseller. It's really well written and really lovely, and there are some very poignant points in here as well. So I would highly recommend this. If you enjoy books about writers, I would say give it a go. As I say, it is completely fictionalised, but there are sort of reference points to go on, but this is what Naomi Wood imagine might have happened, and it's so good. Please let me know down below if you have read this, what did you think about it? Obviously I haven't heard any reviews about it, hence why I am talking about it here, and I will see you next time. Bye!